South African population is probably the most complicated plural society in the whole world. It's also a characteristic of the South African society that different groups in South Africa are highly polarized. And with the creation of the new South Africa in 1994, a particular problem that confronted the drafters of our new constitution was how are we going to deal with these tensions between different ethnic, racial, linguistic, religious groups within the country. And there are several models that have been put to the test in different parts of the world. For example, in May of this year, I was one of 11 people, so-called experts, that were invited to Nepal to assist the Constitutional Assembly of that country in the drafting of a new constitution, following the outbreak of ethnic violence in the country that cost about 147,000 lives, the suspension of the Nepalese constitution, and the drafting of a new constitution. And one of the fundamental problems that is addressed by the Constitutional Assembly of that country is how to deal with group tensions. In Nepal, for example, there are 91 different language groups. It is predominantly a Hindu country, but there are also influential other religious groups. And the proposal that came before the Constitutional Assembly is to create a federal state with different federal entities that represent the different ethnic groups in the country. We cautioned against that approach, because if you are going to separate people that live in tension toward each other on basis of ethnicity and give them political rights in a federal structure, that could be a recipe for disaster. We are reminded by the history in the former Yugoslavia, how attempts to create homogeneous states within Eastern Europe led to bloodshed and even acts of genocide. So I'm not quite sure that that is a good recipe to be followed, but we must remember that the Nepalese are not the only people that try to solve their problems in this way. It's also, for example, part of the Talmud, the Jewish traditional religion, which believes that in order to separate you from your enemy, you build a wall or create a fence, and you separate yourself from the other who is hostile towards yourself. The other model that has been put to the test was to try to create homogeneity within a political community. A good example of this, for example, is Article 15.3c of the Nigerian Constitution, which places an obligation on the Nigerian government to encourage marriages between people of different religions and different ethnic or tribal groups so as to create a homogeneous nation in Nigeria. I'm not quite sure that this is the right way to go. I did ask a Nigerian some time ago what the success was of Article 15 of the Constitution in creating homogeneity, and his answer was that Nigerians are today more divided as they ever were in their history before. So that too does not seem to be an appropriate recipe to follow in South Africa. So what our the drafters of the South African Constitution decided to do is to promote group identities that are prevalent within the South African community. The Constitution proclaims in its preamble that the South African population find their unity in their diversity. We have 11 different official languages. There's an obligation on the state to promote the use of certain indigenous languages. Most important, though, is that the Constitution, in conformity with international law, proclaims the right to self-determination of peoples. That means peoples who are defined as members belonging to a different ethnic, religious, or linguistic group are encouraged to maintain that identity, to create institutions to promote that group interests, and by and large, to be proud of your group identities. You must be proud of being an English-speaking white South African, or an Afrikaans-speaking white South African, or a Zulu, or a Xhosa, or to belong to the Roman Catholic Church or the Dutch Reformed Church, or to any of the independent African churches. You must take pride in using your language, be it Afrikaans, English, Zulu, Xhosa, Pedi. The Constitution wants us to be proud of our group identities and actually also places an obligation on the state to promote group interests of people belonging to different ethnic groups. Pride in your group identity does not mean that you are better than the other. And the Constitution is therefore careful not to use the promotion of group identities to the detriment of people that do not belong to this or that group. So if you claim respect for your group identities, be it ethnic, religious, linguistic, you are expected to show respect for the other, who is of a different ethnic, religious, or linguistic extraction. That means, amongst other things, that the South African law is totally intolerant, has zero tolerance with regard to words or actions that can be offensive to anyone of another group. This is always difficult to explain to an American audience, where freedom of speech is a very important component of the American constitutional system. The United States believe in almost no restrictions on freedom of speech. Theoretically, severe form of hate speech that can lead to violence can be prohibited, but in practice, you can say whatever you like in the United States, however offensive your language might be to others. I always try to explain to Americans that if you have a country that is as highly polarized as South Africa, you cannot expect to protect that much freedom of speech, but has to place a certain constraint on words and actions that are offensive to people of any other ethnic, religious, or linguistic extraction. And the law that has been put into place to give effect to this principle creates an equality court where you can complain about any action or words that you find offensive to you within the confines of your particular group identity. So in South Africa, we now prohibit the use of words such as kafir and coolie and boer that was used in the past to designate in a derogatory way people of certain ethnic extractions. A constraint was placed on an organization known as Jews for Jesus, an advertisement of Jews for Jesus, because it's offensive to the Jewish population. Our media board would not allow the publication in South Africa media of the comic strip of the Holy Prophet because it's offensive to Muslims. There was a case where the owners of a general dealer store refused to serve a Muslim that wore Muslim clothing. That was condemned by the Equality Court. And I can mention many other examples where we tried to condition South Africans not to use words or to engage in action that is offensive to any other person. That is a precondition of maintaining our group identities, pride in our group identities. And so what the Constitution tries to create is what the Archbishop Desmond Tutu called a rainbow people. So if we are going to be a rainbow people, it means pride in your group identities, zero tolerance with regard to words or action that is offensive to people of other groups. And so we hope that in the long run, this policy will bring peace amongst groups within South Africa, and we will move away from our past of intolerance based on ethnic, religious, or linguistic group formations.